So on set, the director can't be like managing lunch breaks. They can't be tracking where people are. They can't be trying to keep track of time. That's not directing. That becomes administering. And that's what the assistant director's job is to absorb.
Hello and welcome to Off the Lot. The film industry is changing fast, and if you want to make movies, it's time to become your own gatekeeper. If you've got a vision and the drive to make it happen, this podcast is for you.
We're your hosts, Ken Kabatov and Anthony Yap, and every week we dive into the hustle, challenges, and strategies of independent filmmaking. We talk to directors, producers, and industry pros about what it really takes to get your film made on your own terms.
Let's dive in.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of Off the Lot. My name is Anthony Yap, and this week, just to give you some updates, Ken has just delivered his director's cut for Remnant, and we are going to be talking with Ken on the next episode in order to kind of get his feelings about how post-production has gone and how the director's cut went. So stay tuned for that next week. As for myself, I am about to begin the final week of pre-production on a movie that I am an assistant director for. This is a supernatural horror film that I'm working on. The movie's called Sundowning. I can't really say too much about it, obviously, right now, but I'll tell you, the movie's called Sundowning. And we've had 3 weeks of prep so far, 3 weeks of pre-production so far. And so we're entering into our last week, which is kind of, for an assistant director, probably the most encapsulating week of everything we've done. It's like for the last 4 weeks, what we've been doing is we've been setting the table on expectations for what the film needs to be. We've been then, pressure testing that against what the budget's going to allow. And what has come back is directive of, okay, well, this is what you want the movie to be. This is what the budget's going to allow. This is what the schedule's going to allow. So now we have to make sure that all of those pieces align. And it's something where I think we have spoken about this before, where there's sort of that trinity of movie production, which is the budget, the schedule, and the script. And they all kind of have to align. If you call the script the creative elements of the story, the budget is obviously where the money comes, the directive from above, what's been allocated to make this particular film. And the schedule is really the logistics of how we put it all together. And those all have to align. So a screenplay goes from being a creative piece that was used to get financing to now that screenplay is actually a work order for every department. So every department is combing through the script, looking for, how does this affect me? So when they see any elements, props departments looking for anything that's going to be a prop in the film, and they're sourcing that, and then they're talking with the director about what the director is looking for from that prop and presenting options. And the same thing's happening with locations, with set decoration, with discussions with the camera team about how do you want to film it? So we need to know what kind of equipment we're going to need for that. So today, what I wanted to do, we're in the thick of it. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about how an assistant director helps the production and how an assistant director can help you as a director of an independent film or as a producer of an independent film. And let's just get cleared up as to what an AD is actually. So when you're hiring an AD for your team, whether you're the director or the producer, usually it's the director who's already on board, and the AD kind of is hired by the director, or at least is vetted by the director. And the reason we do that a lot is because the director and the AD have to have a very symbiotic relationship. The analogy that I like to use with regards to the relationship between the AD and the director is like a general with a strategic vision, the concept of what the movie is in their brain, where the battle needs to go, what the victory is going to look like, kind of what are the objectives of this film from a broader sense. And the assistant director is the chief of staff or the XO. So the general is not there to manage troop movements. They're not managing logistics. They're not managing supply chains. They're not dealing with scheduling. They're not dealing with like what time is the best time and anything like that. That's the job of the XO. The general is the thinker and the planner, and the XO is the executor. So without a strong XO, the general is going to be overwhelmed with these logistics. If you get too much into the micro minutia of a particular operation, then the general risks losing the battle, even if they have a really good strategy, even if it's like, I have a really great idea for a movie, but the movie needs to be executed. So on set, the director can't be like managing lunch breaks. They can't be tracking where people are. They can't be trying to keep track of time. They can't be making sure that makeup is doing what it needs to do, or that hair is doing what it needs to do, or that costumes department is getting the right costume. And they can't be making sure that all of these things are happening in a unified timeline. That's not directing. That becomes administering. And that's what the assistant director's job is to absorb. So we really are running the set. We really are running the production so that the director can focus on directing. Another example would be like in surgery, for example, there's a lead surgeon, and the lead surgeon doesn't prep the OR, manage the nursing staff, or track the instrument counts. Like they're not there to do any of that work. You have circulating nurses, you have surgical coordinators, you have all of those people who make sure that when surgery needs to happen, all the things are in place for the surgeon to do what the surgeon does best. And then the surgeon arrives, operates, and then leaves. And the assistant director is that circulation system of a film set. So why could this be important? Because one of the first, and I think, selfishly most important hires I think you could probably bring on is a sort of key crew member. Once you've got your director in place, or if you're the director and you've got your producing team in place, is the assistant director. The assistant director won't necessarily be informing on directors of photography and so on, but the assistant director can come in and be part of that initial creative team. As I said before, it's like, what's the creative element, what's the budget, and what's the schedule? If you have your assistant director on board at the same time as your director of photography and your director, they can already start working together to try to hone in and get to know each other and get to start working together. And it's usually the assistant director and the director of photography whose in the moment motivations or in the moment objectives can seem to be at odds with each other. A director of photography wants to make the set look as perfect as possible in order to shoot the movie and in order to get the best impact and emotional effect. And the assistant director wants to make sure that we do this on time. So, you can spend hours lighting a scene, but if all you get is that one scene on the day and you needed to get 5 scenes on the day, then the objective of the cinematographer has been only partially achieved because the cinematographer has only gotten one of the 5 scenes that were needed. So, an unfinished film for a cinematographer is kind of useless. On the flip side, as an assistant director, it's my objective to make sure that the director and the cinematographer and the creative team are put in a position to succeed by scheduling the movie efficiently and then keeping track of the time, and not in a dictatorial way, but in a way that complements and supports the work that they need to do. It doesn't do me any good if we are getting all of our shots and all of our scenes in according to the schedule, but all of it is done too quickly. We don't get any good takes from each setup. In other words, actors are missing their marks, or we need some retakes because it's not quite getting there in a scene. The lighting hasn't been set up properly, or the set isn't ready. Production design hasn't had the time they needed to get the set ready in time. So all of these elements, all of these departments have a huge objective to provide excellent work. And the assistant director is there to create the environment where that excellent work can occur. I like to tell everybody that I'm here to grease the tracks, not to put molasses on the tracks. So an assistant director can teach you a lot if you want to about producing a movie and about what the elements that go into producing a movie. There's a lot of stuff that an assistant director sees from the floor that you can't necessarily see from the producer's chair. And in the movie that I'm working on right now, without giving anything away, it's like we have a lot of scenes in this film. For example, we have well over 150 scenes that are in this movie. Well, each scene requires at least one setup or one shot. And I always am looking at that and going, well, if every scene requires at least one setup, many scenes are going to require more than one setup. In fact, probably 90% of them are going to require more setups, more camera moves in a scene. No matter how long the scene is, it's going to require some camera moves. And every camera move takes time. So if I'm looking at a script with 150 plus odd scenes, I know I'm looking at something that's going to have 300 to 400 setups minimum over the course of a movie, maybe more like 500 setups over the course of a movie. If you're going to have 500 setups over the course of a movie, that you have to start doing some math and figuring out how long on average does a setup take in order to achieve a film. And in horror films, especially, or heavy action movies, setups take a long time because there's also safety. There's often rigging. There's often some special effects. There's makeup things that need to happen. There's wardrobes changes that need to happen. And there's set design that is definitely a lot more heightened with a horror film than necessarily a drama drama, only because with horror films, you are looking for, especially supernatural horror films, everything in there is being made up. You're having some elements that are going to happen that have to be tricks for the audience doesn't pick up on. Like, how do you make someone levitate? How do you have a bullet hit? How do you have all those kinds of things? So I'm flagging all these elements for the producers. What in the script is costing money from a scheduling and from a logistics standpoint, not necessarily how much it costs, but how much time it's going to cost and how much time these things are going to take. Because ultimately, number of days of shooting that really are the most expensive. I mean, every day on a set is an expensive endeavor. It's relative compared to the budget you have and the film you have and the size of the crew. But the one place to reduce your budget is to cut your film days. But if you cut your film days too much, you're cutting them at the expense of making a movie that you want to make. So oftentimes I'm in that puzzle of trying to put together a schedule properly. As a producer, we look at the script from a very broad picture standpoint and we try to budget out those elements. And oftentimes as a producer, you go to the assistant director and go like, how many days does this movie really need in order for it to be achieved properly? And that's a good, there's always what does that mean to an assistant director? Well, most assistant directors have sort of a sliding scale of how many days a movie needs based on the budget that they've been given. It's like, if you tell me that the budget is $100,000, I'll tell you the only way to achieve this film at $100,000 is either fewer days or strip down a lot of the work that's needed to happen. But if you give me $2 million, it's probably the same problem. The $2 million I'm going to tell you we need fewer days than what would probably be ideal in order to make a proper movie. Once you give me $10 million or $20 million, the problems change. Usually what we do is we add more days because of the budget. The budget usually allows you to add more days to a shooting schedule because you can afford to do your level of quality each day can increase because you have more time to do it. That doesn't necessarily mean that we always say we never have enough time, but it means that you have time to get things closer to, 99% the way you want them to be. And you can afford you can afford to change your perspective a little bit, or you change your mind. Another thing that we see from the floor that a lot of times the producers don't always see, and we can see the gap that exists between what the director is imagining and what the day can afford. I oftentimes time out every day, and I kind of go like, this day will take us, based on the shot list, based on the expectations of the day, this day will take us 14 hours, this day will take us 10 hours. And I can oftentimes, just from experience, know, just going through each scene and each setup, go, okay, I think this day is going to take about longer than what we have or shorter than what we have. I mean, if it's going to be shorter, then what else can we put on it to help take some of the pressure off of other days? And then this is another military parallel, I think, because assistant directors think in hours. A general will tell us that we need to take the hill by noon, and the XO knows the terrain, the supply lines, the fatigue level of the troops, and has to tell the general what's actually achievable. And that's a conversation that we would have. And if it's done well, it will save the production and actually make it really good. And if it's done poorly, we will end up going overtime, or we'll end up with frustration on everybody's part. Most likely frustration on the production and the director's part, because what we wanted to do, we couldn't do. And it's really tough to give bad news when everybody's in a stressed situation. It's better to give bad news in prep and to then find solutions to the problem. Something that I've really picked up on a lot more in the last couple of years is that visual effects is a super important element of movies nowadays. And that's not something new, but visual effects are in almost every movie you ever watch on screen. There's some element of visual effects in it. And oftentimes what we do is what independent films will do sometimes is say, well, we'll need some visual effects. We just don't know what they're going to be. Like, in other words, we're going to have some cleanup work to be done. I think that visual effects is a very important pre-production problem to address. And even to have your visual effects person as a part of the key components right from the start, only because there are sometimes very good solutions in visual effects that can solve a lot of production headaches. And knowing that early on can be really helpful, but also setting realistic expectations of what visual effects can actually give you for the price that you can afford. There's a lot of things that visual effects can do, but everything does cost money. And And you need to be you need to, as a producer and as a director, you need to know what you can get out of visual effects to make a really solid film. Yeah. So like what as an assistant director, for me, how I do my job the most effectively is that, I read through a screenplay, right? Read through the first draft of the screenplay that I'm given. And that's the first time and the last time that I sort of read it as a story, as an element of something, of a movie that I'm going to see in my brain. Because from that moment on, once I've read the script, I'm looking at it now from a scheduling and a logistics standpoint. So every scene is becoming a question of what is actually required to execute this scene. Again, if the director's the magician, my job is to figure out how the trick gets done. So that's almost where you're two sides of the same person, where there's a creative vision and then there's a logistical vision, and your left brain and your right brain now have to start to become in synergy with each other. For me, a lot of times, as an assistant director, I'm driven, especially in the independent film world, driven by location. Locations are everything for an assistant director. Like, where are we shooting? How long can we be at that location? What are we shooting at that location? And a lot of those things really do dictate how I do my job. And so being involved in the location planning is super essential for me, because every single part of that affects how I schedule the movie. And obviously, like, I like to tell everybody, it's important for us to channel our sort of inner laziness. We want to move as little as possible in order to get through the movie. And that on a big picture, that means like literally changing locations. Changing locations is an expensive and a costly time endeavor. Whenever you do it, it's an expense. But the biggest impact on the film is doing it quite a bit throughout the day. For example, every time you are moving, you're costing time. Even just where you're moving from one set to another set. That moving from one set to another set within the same location, it actually takes some time. You have to imagine, like, lots of heavy equipment, and taking it and moving it from one end of a home to another end of a home, from one set to another set. Even just moving a camera can be a 10 to 15 minute endeavor. And moving a camera and getting all the support gear in the right place is something you're always keeping in track of. And again, so this is where locations is really, really dictates how an assistant director can work effectively. And you learn as an assistant director that the most expensive line item in your shoot is indecision. Decisions just need to be made, not necessarily fast, but deliberately and efficiently. I think sometimes because we are so worried about getting it wrong, we sometimes don't realize that sometimes the decision you make in the moment is the correct one, because especially with a director who has a really strong vision of what their film is, they don't necessarily have to know every single little thing, but with a director with a really strong vision of what their film is. And I like to think, like, especially the film I'm working on right now, the director has a really strong vision of what they want their film to make, but they don't have all the answers to everything. And so they know the right answer when they hear it. And what I find with a director like that is what can be really helpful is that director, gets presented with an option. If they can understand that they don't need the perfect option, they just need the one that feels right in the moment. If they can stand behind that feeling of it feeling right, it'll be the right decision, simply because they have their vision of the film as the general is guiding that small decision, that small minutia decision in that moment. And that decision can be something as simple as, like, what kind of watch should the actor be wearing in this scene? It seems really simple, but watches tell a lot about the character of who's playing. They speak a lot about who that character is without the character needing to talk. And so a director who has a strong vision of the movie, you get 3 watches presented to you, and you can look at them and you can go, you know what, that's the one. Or you can look at them in conversation with the props person. You think to yourself, yep, that's the tone I want to set. That's what I want this to look like. So hope that makes sense. In talking, the third segment of what I'm talking about when I talk about being an assistant director and finding a good assistant director, I think that this is self-serving, but I really believe that an independent film director and a producer spending the time to find the right assistant director is so very important. And there's all kinds of personalities and that you're looking for. But I really believe that taking the time to get the right person is going to help you so much. A strong one that is exactly the kind of person that can fit in well with your director is worth its weight in gold. You think about a film as a startup. You've got early stage founders and so on who are oftentimes trying to do everything themselves. And they resist hiring that one person like an operations lead because they think they can do everything. And, directors, I think, are really great at, again, trying to solve the problems before they occur, especially really conscientious directors. They're always trying to, solve scheduling and timing problems before they need to, or before the assistant director comes on, so that they don't come to the set and go, here's a whole bunch of problems for you to solve. They almost want to have it all figured out before they talk to someone about it. And the productions that do really well are the ones where the director has that in their brain, but also recognizes that, I really need to be focused on this aspect of the film. I've done what I can to bring it to this point, but it's not to be at this moment to solve all these little stunt problems, all these little, like, how do we achieve this problems? There's a person out there for me that can help me with that aspect and can come to me and tell me honestly whether or not there are alternatives to this, or we need to balance things out more with regards to what we're looking to accomplish. That's a very vague way of saying it. It's like, let's say, for example, you have a very elaborate scene especially in a horror film, you have a jump scare happening and there's going to be elements of stunt work, there's going to be elements of special effects, there's going to be elements of human work, like the actor work. There might even be elements of visual effects involved and makeup effects and so on. So there's several departments who are being informed. Wardrobe as well, because you might need changes, or the wardrobe is supposed to look very specific for certain things. So you're going to have all these departments that are going to try to be figuring things out, and in relation to this one very specific scene. And it's really easy as a conscientious director to want to make that easier on everybody by simplifying things or making it as simple as possible. And in my opinion, what you do is you take what you're looking for, you have your vision in your head, and what you do is you work on trying to show everybody what you want out of it. I've really learned that directors who storyboard are great, even if they're not great artists. If they can actually put that down on paper, what they want to see in their film in each shot, it really is helpful for the department to figure it out. Director doesn't have to sit there and say, well, this is going to be a stunt, this is going to be the actor doing their own stunt, this is going to be a special effect. They just need to show everybody what they want to accomplish, and then we all can sit around and go, okay, you know what, that should probably be special effects department, that should probably be a stunt person, because we don't want the actor falling off a ladder and so on, and the stunt person can fall off the ladder, but we can also rig it properly and to make sure that the stunt actor is safe. That's the kind of stuff that, as a director, focus on what you want to accomplish and then let the departments figure things out. And if you have a good assistant director, the assistant director is going to corral all of that together and is going to make sure those conversations are all happening so everybody is unified and on the same page. So that's where having that strong assistant director helps you as a director, because you then don't have to be that, in that early startup sort of analogy, you don't have to be an early stage founder who's also trying to be the chief financial officer, the HR department, and the office manager all at the same time. And as an indie producer, oftentimes, independent productions, usually the writer and the director are very well known to each other. Either they are the same person or they are a partnership that has collaborated to make this film. They bring on a producing partner to help with all of that. Sometimes that producing partner is also part of their cohort from early on. Those people have a very high level version of what they want to see this movie become. And then you need to have your high level version meet the pressure test of practicality and pragmatism and what kind of money do we have to make this work. What can break if you don't have a good assistant director is you will have long days, which will lead to crew morale collapsing, regardless of whether you're paying them or not. Even crew working long days on movies where they're getting paid a lot, your morale starts to drop. That also means that if morale is dropping on the crew, if the crew are not, energized and good to go, that means that the feeling on set can affect the performances on set. So if there's tension on set, actors can feel that as well. And when the performance drops, of course, the movie suffers. If you don't have a great assistant director, the director is finding themselves doing a lot of logistics, heavy lifting on the logistics themselves, which means they're not focusing on the emotional thread of the scene, the creative elements of the scene, and they're not focused on their actors, which is really, honestly, the one department that the directors have to have the strongest relationship with is the actors. Because the director of photography can take care of the creative vision. If the director knows what they want to see, they don't have to know anything about the lenses. They don't have to know anything about how to light a scene. They just have to know what they want and then give the directive to the director of photography, who then can communicate that to their team. But with actors, the director has a one-on-one relationship with them. Directors, especially in independent film, the director has that special relationship with the actor that nobody else can really replace. So that's super important. And we got to give that time, because just as we don't want the actors to be burdened with the machinations and the minutiae of a film set, we also don't want the director to necessarily be doing that. The other things that break are departments just don't communicate. We discover problems on the day instead of in the weeks before. We discover that the who we thought was responsible for something thought that someone else was responsible for it. And so that particular element isn't ready for shooting. And that can happen, especially when you have a film that has, whether it's stunts or breakables or things like that. Like, oftentimes there's a lot of crossover in departments, and they always have to communicate and say, you're getting this, right? Or you're getting this. So it's up to the assistant director to be corralling all of that and making sure that happens. So the other side of it too is that a strong assistant director creates an economy of respect on the set. A strong AD will give the director authority. In other words, a strong AD will create the space so that when the director speaks, everybody is listening. When the assistant director is commanding that floor and has clarity in what the instructions that they're giving, the crew trusts that the production is happening for the right reasons. So an assistant director who has that ability to command the set, and it doesn't mean like being dictatorial about it, but just everybody knows that the assistant director has this in hand, they will tend to listen to what the assistant director is asking for. And that trust between the crew and the assistant director will flow back up to the director. So a weak assistant director can create chaos, and chaos makes everyone doubt the director. Anyway, those are some things that are on my thoughts for as an assistant director. This is obviously my wheelhouse. I've been doing assistant directing now since 2008. I assistant directed my first short film. And so I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. And this is where my wheelhouse is oftentimes. I think being an assistant director has made me a much stronger producer, because I understand the coalescing of elements, and producing is adding money and adding authority to those decisions that get made on the day-to-day basis. I also think that assistant directing has prepared me, even though assistant directing, the name is sort of weirdly tied to directing. Assistant director is not an assistant to the director. An assistant director is effectively a director, but a director of the left side of the brain. The assistant director is the director of the logical side of the brain, and the director is the director of the creative side of the brain. And so realistically, what you do is you have two sides of the same person, and the assistant director is very helpful with that. But as a director, as a person who's also directing, being an assistant director lets me understand the machinations and the minutia of how the set is run. And the thing that I find is that it also helps me think about how I want to shoot a film in a different way. So I come to it with that AD brain. Now, interestingly enough, I'm really happy as a director to pass that responsibility of the XO responsibility to a very good assistant director, because I know that, just from my own experience, I know that if I have someone like that who can guide that part of the production, that I will have more freedom to do the thing I want to do as a director. So meet your assistant directors. If you're a director or producer, it's good to have a good roster of them, because the one you want isn't always available. And hopefully you run into that problem. Hopefully what this helps you as an independent filmmaker is that if you want to really know how things work on a film set, come and sit with the assistant director for a day, and you will have a better sense of how your production is going. You'll also have a better sense of the kind of things that we're dealing with and that we're trying to solve. And your instincts will get better as a producer and as a director. You will know more about what you need to protect, and you also have a better sense of what you're spending on in pre-production, what money needs to be spent and on what. You can also start to assess what a director actually needs versus what they say they need. And again, the best producers, I think, have these sort of floor instincts, and the assistant director work is how you build floor instincts. So let me know if you have any questions about that. I love talking about being an AD. I have one more week of prep. I'll probably have more to talk about next week. And otherwise, have a great week and look forward to our next episode.
Okay, so that's it for this week's episode of Off the Lot. We want to hear from you. If there are any topics you want covered or any questions you'd like answered, please email us at podcast.offthelot@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube. Our handles are in the show notes. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And share this with your friends. See you next week.